Thanks for listening to the Reintegrate podcast, where we discuss the joys and frustrations of trying to live an integrated Christian life. I'm Brendan Romai, and my co-host is Dr. Bob Robinson. Bob says he likes to talk with me about important issues, but usually I just end up ranting about how We Are the City is an underrated band. He still won't watch their movie, even though it won a bunch of Canadian awards, which I guess are the film award equivalent of Monopoly money in Bob's eyes.
Yes, it is.
Well, speaking of movies, this week we have the privilege to host a guest who has his own Wikipedia page with a filmography. So it's great to have you on the show, Craig. So we've got Craig Detweiler, Ph.D., who is a filmmaker and author. He wrote the screenplays for the family film The Duke and the comedic road trip film titled Extreme Days. He recently directed the award-winning documentary titled Remand. Craig has written or co-written many books on Christian engagement with pop culture, media, and technology, including his latest book, co-authored with Robert Johnston and Cutter Calloway, titled Deep Focus, Film and Theology and Dialogue, published by Baker Academic. Craig's cultural commentary has been featured on ABC's Nightline, CNN, NPR, The New York Times, and The Wall Street Journal. He's served as a professor at Biola University, Pepperdine University, and Fuller Seminary, where Bob took a class from him on the theology of pop culture for his doctoral degree. Craig is the co-founder of the Wind Rider Forum, an approved and sanctioned event that takes place during the Sundance Film Festival. Wind Rider is an immersive experience for 250 students from 25 Christian universities and seminaries, featuring leaders from film, media, business, academia, ministry, and journalism. They invite Sundance's cutting-edge filmmakers into the Wind Rider Forum, where Craig leads a Q&A time with them to honor their craft, listen to their stories, and find thoughtful, spiritual themes in their work. As someone who is very much immersed in pop culture, film, and technology, I want to personally thank you, Craig, for being on the podcast tonight.
Well, thank you, Brendan. I got a little tired just listening to your introduction. I was like, did I do all that?
That was after me editing it down, too.
No, it was easily twice as long as that when I originally wrote it.
Man, I got to relax. I need a vacation.
Yeah, you gotta stop writing so many books. I had to cut down all the books. There was like 10 of them.
Yeah, well, I don't know. When I went to college, English was my worst subject. So I guess I got a good education because they taught me how to write, and I haven't stopped since.
Judging from your biography, one thing is abundantly clear, which is you have a passion for film and pop culture, which is obviously reflected in your body of work. So why, as a devoted follower of Jesus Christ, do you personally find so much value in film?
I think film was my maybe original way of processing the world and the confusion of it all, and looking for heroes and looking for meaning. We had animated versions of Marvel back in the day. You know, you had an animated Spider-Man and the Hulk and Iron Man. And obviously I watched those as a little kid. I watched the live action Batman. I was into Humphrey Bogart movies, Clint Eastwood movies. I think I was trying to figure out how to navigate this world before really I had a sense of maybe who Jesus was and how he would deal with the authorities in smart and sneaky ways. And so for me, I always integrated those things. I didn't look at film as something separate from faith, but something that actually in some ways led me into faith.
That's an extremely interesting way to process that. I don't think a lot of Christians would ever have considered film specifically, especially secular film, the main body of pop culture, to be something that could draw someone towards seeking Christ. Did you find your faith more into your adult life, or was that something that happened earlier for you?
Things got solidified towards the end of high school and into college. I was invited to a Young Life club, and the concept of personal relationship with Jesus was something very interesting, strange, and fascinating to me. But it was seeing like the bloody R-rated films of Martin Scorsese that I started to get in touch to some degree with my own self-destructiveness and my own sin. And so here's Scorsese making all these movies about how you shouldn't behave and how you shouldn't live. And I was like, well, now that's really interesting, because these other people at Young Life are suggesting that if I follow Jesus, I might, maybe experience eternal life starting now and break some of these habits that are vexing me. And so I see that going on even today. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily recommend a young person watch Wolf of Wall Street it's filled with nothing but, 3 hours of excessive degradation, too many drugs, too much alcohol, too much money, too much sex. And yet all of that addictive behavior, you see the wages of that sin. And so by the end of that journey with Leonardo DiCaprio, I mean, I'd come out of that movie and say, man, Leonardo needs help, and I do too. I need a bath. I want to get clean. I want to get free from that. And that's the wonder and beauty of the grace that God provides.
Yeah, you mentioned Scorsese, and that made me think about one of his earlier films. I believe he did Mean Streets.
He did.
And the Harvey Keitel's character in that movie is, I think, interesting for a Scorsese character, in that he has a faith element as part of who he is, and you kind of get to watch him. That film's unique because I think it kind of juxtaposes the gangster lifestyle he often portrays, but also you have a character who has this moral compass of faith that he believes in. He's constantly convicted that he's doing wrong and he wants to do better, but he doesn't know how.
And isn't that most of us on any given day, right? Where it's like we Jesus, I love you, but man, I woke up this morning and I've been making mistakes and saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing and offending people ever since. And I need help and I need forgiveness. And how do I overcome this habit? You see in Mean Streets, I think Harvey Keitel literally like putting his hand over a flame and almost testing it, right? Trying to almost purify himself. And I think that's the struggle we're all in, right? Is can I put my hand in this flame? Will I get burned if I play with fire, whatever that fire might be? There's all kinds of temptations in a young person's life and in a wealthy person's life and in a desperate person's life. So we can relate, I think, to those spiritual struggles that are inherent in a Scorsese film, whether that's an early film like Mean Streets or a late film like The Irishman. They're all about people who have done things that are wrong and are trying to figure out how to atone for those sins.
It's kind of interesting to observe that pattern when you really read into his work, because I think a lot of people take Scorsese films at face value, where you're just like, wow, you remember Goodfellas where that crazy thing happened or whatever, but like he has recurring themes with the characters that he writes, and it speaks to human brokenness.
And out of his own brokenness and out of his own search, he was studying to be a priest before he went to film school, before he ended up at NYU. And so he says for himself, his whole life has been movies. That's it, religion and film. And you see it consummated in a film like Silence, right? It's like a 3-hour meditation on faith and martyrdom. Very few people have seen that film, because who wants to see like a film about, priests in the, Portuguese priests martyred as missionaries in Japan. Like, that's not really a best-selling premise.
That's the feel-good movie of the summer right there.
Yeah, I think
I really thought it was at Christmas even, right? Like, who wants to see that for Christmas vacation?
I really thought it was going to edge out the next Avengers movie at the box office.
But, that film and the struggles and the issues of that film, it's built to last, 100 years. It's like a cinematic cathedral, in the way it's constructed, kind of like Terrence Malick's Tree of Life. He's not trying to entertain you. He's trying to bring you into an experience to ponder the meaning of life and to slow down your heartbeat long enough for you to get in touch with your own longing, your own brokenness, and hopefully a mystical experience of God that might even occur within a cinema.
I really appreciate that insight. This is going to be a tough episode for us to, I think, film and edit, because there's just, I think every single question I could just keep going, because as for me as a film buff and for someone who really does like to read into the deeper meaning of films. It's I could go forever about it. Bob will tell you that.
No, it's one of the reasons why I want to have Craig on because it's one of the best things I experience is having these conversations with college students because pop culture and movies is their language. This is what they consume. And so I try to help them. I tell them the story of the gospel is creation, fall, redemption, consummation. And I said, so go to the movies and look for those four elements in the movie. I bet you'll see those four elements in every movie.
Generally speaking, whoever a filmmaker is pouring themselves into what they're making. They're pouring some kind of a message, whether that's a positive one or a negative one. It is part of a dialogue, I think, between us and God, whether or not we realize it.
And they're inviting you into their own efforts to process the meaning of life through stories, through characters, through surrogates, people standing in our place who allow us to get a little perspective on life. So right. We might have things we're struggling with and we can't quite name, and yet those characters might be struggling with similar temptations, disappointments, heartbreak. And it's in that empathetic exchange that we start to say, is that how I'm feeling? And how does God feel about me feeling that way? And where is God in relationship to me in this movie theater or when I'm outside of that movie theater? And it's just doing that little bit of work, that attention, right, to our own soul. It's that buying of time, right? Literally, when you buy put down your money for those 2 hours in the dark, you're actually kind of buying a little space to process kind of what's going on, whether you're trying to escape from something or to get in touch with something. And oftentimes you're doing both at the same time.
For many Christians, movies, TV, and music are like kind of a mixed bag of content as far as things that are, appropriate, things that are good, things that have redemptive value to us. But some things have what critics call artistic value, but the themes tied up in that artistic value can also be repugnant to Christian sensibilities. However, more often than not, it's not always cut and dry regarding what is appropriate versus worth watching. Some films have, themes that are deeply spiritual, like we were just talking about a lot of Scorsese's movies, but also are not family friendly, like a lot of Scorsese's movies. So what is your advice to the average Christian listening to this podcast, being, a discerning consumer of pop culture while also being faithful to Jesus?
I would answer in the same way that I think Paul answers this question when people ask about what's appropriate. He actually kind of forces us to take our own discipleship responsibly and to not necessarily point a finger at externals, right? Jesus didn't judge sin as something that is outside of us, right? But it is a problem that's internal to us. And I think we tend to say, well, that movie made me do it. Well, no, actually, that's what's already in you. I had a Christian leader at a large university tell me he couldn't watch Schindler's List because he was dealing with lust. And I was kind of like, lust in Schindler's List? Like, what is he talking about? And then I realized that even in seeing naked people sent to the gas chamber, he was potentially getting like sexually turned on. Well, that's not Spielberg's fault, right? And that's
got to be the least erotic nudity scene in all of film, right?
Exactly. So here is a Christian leader who says, I can't watch that film. Well, that's not the film's fault, right? That's your own kind of struggle with the body and your kind of inability. I mean, maybe you'd have the same problem if you went to a great museum in Europe. Maybe you couldn't look at masterpieces without, kind of possessing the depictions up on that screen. But that's us taking an internal problem and in a sense trying to externalize it. And I guess I would challenge folks to just get in touch with their own sense of responsibility for their own diet in terms of what is healthy for them and what they can handle. But in the same way, Paul, I think, would not necessarily allow us to condemn those who maybe pursue a different diet.
To give some grace to the pastor you're talking to, at least he was aware enough of his own sin to know this is the place I don't go. And I think a lot of people are like, they don't even think about that, and they just jump into something and they're like, well, I was tempted. I don't know why. Well, make you need to put up some walls and be careful about certain things.
Right. Well, and I also wouldn't justify shows that are obviously exploitative. I think my wife and I watched the first episode of Game of Thrones, and we saw the way that they were handling women and nudity as deeply exploitative, and we just said, you know what? I don't want to go there. I'm not going to pay HBO to do that to me. I'm not going to judge others who might watch it, but I, for myself, am saying, you know what? I think that's going to make me feel absolutely dirty because of how they're handling, in this case, or mishandling people. And in fact, it came out after the show that the actresses themselves felt exploited in how they were being dealt with on set and on screen. And so, it's a very complex set of issues that you're raising here.
And I think kind of like you were talking about, some things are created to be more or less exploitative. And I think, that's especially...
and some movies are absolutely artistic, like Saw 3.
Right, of course. But really, like, you think about... I think the horror genre is a genre that's plagued with Saw movies, with what people call murder porn. But the horror genre is also a genre that can cause you to, when it's done right, it can cause deep introspection about what we're really afraid of, because fear is one of the, the primary challengers of faith.
Well, and frankly, horror is probably the most consistently spiritual genre. It's sort of inherent in the material itself. Just even in the last few years, films like The Witch, it will mess with you, right? It's deeply, deeply scary. It's deeply disturbing, but it is also about that aspect of life, the mysterious sides of life where we have a hard time maybe explaining things or understanding things. And I don't want to be afraid of those things. I want to be able to deal with the mysterious and not be freaked out. Yeah.
And last time I cried in a movie was A Quiet Place.
Mm.
It was like, it's just a horror movie about monsters, and you're scared all the way through. But then at the end, no spoilers, but you just go, this is about that.
Mm.
It's about sacrifice. It's about love. It was amazing.
Yeah. It's about family, right? Yeah. No, great example. It also has tended to be recently the way that a lot of our complex social issues get discussed. Yeah. So whether that's Get Out, providing a great entree into the African-American experience in America and taking us as viewers into the sunken place of how it feels to be powerless or to be, in a sense, brainwashed in a certain kind of way. This year there was a film called The Invisible Man that deals with what it feels like to be a woman who's been put in those positions and has been gaslit by an abuser. And so it's a great way into, like, what is all this pain and angst regarding Me Too or Black Lives Matter? If you want to understand, these films give you a visceral experience of what it's like to feel exploited, of what it's like to feel powerless, and how much it takes, how much faith it takes to rise up and take on your oppressor.
My mentor, Stephen Garber, always says the artists arrive first. And it's like, this is, we have a trouble sometimes making arguments and saying this is an issue or that's an issue, but you see a movie and all of a sudden you understand because the art does it.
Well, it's even the power of representation. You know, I mean, that was the power of Black Panther for African American audiences to see themselves in this kingdom, right? That has a certain level of power and agency and creativity, and to say, yes, this is also our heritage. This is also our people. It just reframed an entire narrative around Wakanda. And so Wakanda became a state of mind.
Right.
You know, not just a mythical place, but a place you can inhabit.
I read an African-American writer talk about that, and she wrote, watching people who looked like me prospering, creating, leading, and saving the day on the big screen made my heart burst with pride, because so often Hollywood does not portray us in that manner.
There it is. And I think, you know, to even see an actor like Chadwick Boseman and the roles that he consciously chose to play icons like Jackie Robinson, James Brown, Thurgood Marshall, all of those things lead him into that place as T'Challa, as the Black Panther. And you have this image of strength that becomes much larger than any one actor, where you're standing in and taking on these collective dreams and aspirations on behalf of people. And to do that as a person of faith, which Chadwick Boseman's Christian faith, he spoke about it in all kinds of different contexts, you know, from a graduation speech at his alma mater, you know, to interviews that he gave throughout his all too brief life. And even into the final film that he appeared in, that I saw him in, playing a character named Stormin Norman in Spike Lee's film *Da 5 Bloods*. I don't think it's giving away too much to say that the mantra for the film is it's a film about forgiveness, and can we forgive ourselves, and can others forgive us? And really it comes down to the question of God is love and love is God, something that Marvin Gaye sang and that these characters come to live and inhabit. It's really probably one of my favorite films of 2020.
Chadwick Boseman, his legacy, I think he's going to go down as perhaps this generation's greatest actor, because he has so epitomized this whole reawakening of understanding of what racial injustice is about. And every one of his characters, he's just like, he's boom. When I saw 42, I was just blown away. It was so amazing.
And that was a conscious choice. I just saw today that in one of his early acting roles, he was on the soap opera All My Children. And when he got the script and saw that it was like his mother was a crack addict and his dad was in jail, he was kind of like, I don't want to play this character. And he walked away. He walked away from the opportunity. So even for himself, he had higher standards of the stories, the kinds of stories he wanted to tell. And I think increasingly that's what we're seeing rising to the top. You see a filmmaker like Greta Gerwig, who as an actor had many opportunities to play all different kinds of characters, but when it was time for her to write her own story, she does something like Lady Bird, right? That interweaves, you know, comedy and drama and family pain and faith and Catholicism in just really, really deep and beautiful ways. And she follows that up with Little Women. And now she's giving us multiple images of women who are making their own choices about who they want to be and their calling. And their calling as writers, their calling as creators, and becomes deeply inspirational because she's taken all of that work she did as an actor, all of the cachet that she developed, and said, I want to use it for positive means. And that's a great inspiration, I think, to any aspiring filmmaker, storyteller, or even pastor.
So I wanted to ask at least, you know, one question regarding the Wind Rider Forum. Over the years of that you've spent hosting Wind Rider, what are some of the key lessons and observations you've kind of taken away from that experience?
Right. Well, the beauty of Wind Rider is embedded in its name itself. Right? A Wind Rider is someone who's going with the Spirit, going with the wind. And so we don't necessarily have a master plan because you're going in and you're seeing world premieres. So you don't know really what film you're going to see what it's going to be about, and how it might move you. And so you have to kind of go in the same way that C.S. Lewis asks us to set aside our prejudices and like deal with the text or deal with the story. You have to basically say, I don't know what I'm going to see. And so I have to be open to what it is that filmmaker wants to communicate. What makes it so powerful is that when you're at Sundance, you're in the first audience. So you're shaping the public reaction in real time. And you have a chance to ask your question and shape the public response that'll go forward from like here to the Oscars. And so invariably, we go up to these filmmakers afterwards if they've done something that's really deep and moving and spiritual and inspiring, and we say, hey, will you come back and talk to us? We've got 50 to 100 students, 200 students right here who want to go deeper with you. And what filmmaker is going to turn that down? Right? I mean, that's why they made the film, is to have those conversations.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
while all the other conversations about, how much is the film going to sell for and who's going to buy it, what they want to talk about are the actual issues, the stories, the themes, the characters. And that's what we want to talk about as well. And so that's what happens within the Windrider Forum, is we invite them into this faith community of, 100, 200 faith leaders, college professors, Christian college students, filmmakers, seminarians. And the filmmakers are like, who are you people? What is this group? And we're like, hey, we've been coming here for like 15 years. This isn't an upstart thing. Over the years, we've dealt with filmmakers before they go big. Ryan Coogler came and talked to our group with Fruitvale Station way before Black Panther. And of course, the faith component in these filmmakers is really interesting as well. They may not say this up front in big, loud ways, but you think about the body of work of what Ryan Coogler's done, and you see his deep Christian faith embedded in how he treats his characters, in the spirit that inhabits his films. There's no mistake in even why he casts certain people like Angela Bassett, deeply Christian woman. The characters who played, the sisters and the warriors in Black Panther, deeply Christian women. Chadwick Boseman himself. So he's inviting that spirit of God to that wind to blow even on his film set. And so we're kind of coming alongside that, is what I would say we're doing. It's a very weird time in the film business, and this will be an interesting transition, maybe test. I don't really know what's going to happen. There's been kind of fun, super fun indie films like the Vast of Night, which is kind of like a sci-fi, like an 80s style Spielberg sci-fi film set in New Mexico. It's like a radio drama like War of the Worlds, and it just went straight to Amazon. And you can find it and you can see it if you know about it. Right. But because it didn't really go to theaters, you don't really know about it. So you don't even know to look for it, and it kind of gets lost in the shuffle. But it's utterly charming and super fun.
I guess 2020 has been a weird year to kick off the next decade of filmmaking, considering you have a lot of these films kind of hanging in limbo.
Yes.
Movie purgatory, I guess, whatever you want to call it.
Well, there's a film called Palm Springs, which is about purgatory, starring Andy Samberg and Kristen Milletti. And it's kind of Groundhog Day, but based on the moment we're in, it feels a little like a pandemic film, how we're kind of stuck in this pandemic loop. It's very R-rated, so, if you're offended by crass language, I understand. But it also is surprisingly sweet. At the core of the film, as they try to escape this loop that we're all kind of stuck in.
Huh. I have to add it to the list. I'm going to be re-listening to this episode and making a list of all the stuff you referenced that I need to see. I wanted to ask you about the past 10 years of filmmaking. I read through your article on Pathos about your top 30 films of the 2010s. And maybe based on that, and maybe if that's changed at all since you wrote that article, would you want to give like an abridged version, maybe 5 films right now for the person listening that you would recommend?
Well, hopefully they're things that people have seen. I think a film like Mad Max Fury Road announces itself as a action thriller chase film, but at its core, it's also about female empowerment. It's also about the environment. It's about how we survive. It's about what community might look like in the 21st century, what leadership looks like in the 21st century. And I think that's why it resonates, right? It's a thriller. It gets the adrenaline pumping, but it's got some really deep, thoughtful ideas behind it. I'd say the same thing about a sci-fi film like Arrival. You know, how do you respond to a perceived invasion? How do you deal with the other? I think it's a great commentary at a time when we're dealing with immigration and class differences and racial differences. We're really having a struggle right now, even learning how to communicate and treat each other decently. And Arrival shows how much patience it takes and how much time it takes to learn another person's language, particularly when that other person might be a being from outer space. But I think that's what makes...
Or a being from a different race, or a being from...
Exactly.
It's a great commentary on that. Excellent.
Normally, my takeaway for most guests we have is, wow, I need to read my Bible more. But this, I need to read my Bible more and watch more movies.
That's the hope, right? Is that it would inspire us. You know, I mean, if you see a film like, there's an update of Les Miserables that's on Amazon right now. That's French film, and it has elements of the Victor Hugo story, but it's about everything that's going on. It's about immigrants. It's about police abuse. It's about injustice. And, you know, for me, that makes me go back to the Bible and say, what does the Bible have to say about immigrants and strangers? And how would Jesus respond to people who are not like me? What are we supposed to do with the other? So you could ignore the film, and then you also might end up ignoring those passages in the Bible. I'd rather watch the film and open the Bible and figure out how those two things go together. The great films of Bong Joon-ho that have been recognized, both Snowpiercer and Parasite, are really about the same thing. They're about the financial divide, the class divide, the way that we treat people as second-class citizens, the difference between the front of the train and the back of the train, upstairs and downstairs, and can we learn to dignify those who we might view as less than? Can we see them as whole people created in the image of God and treat them with the same kind of respect? And if not, we might end up with complete chaos on our hands, like what happens in Snowpiercer, like what happens in Parasite, where there becomes a lot of blood, right? Either we figure out how to get along, or we're going to end up with a lot of blood on this train. It's called, you know, humanity. And then I might mention one more like super underrated film, an underseen film called Shoplifters, which is a Japanese film that is just exquisitely beautiful, just smart and funny and humane. You'll be laughing, you'll be crying. And it really is about like, well, what is family? And how do we welcome people in who aren't like us? And how do we treat those that we might encounter on the street and be tempted to walk past and not see and not acknowledge as God's son, as God's daughter? It's fascinating that we're kind of turning to these filmmakers maybe outside of our shores who have a better way of maybe rehumanizing us. I think the same thing happens in Get Out. I think the same thing happens in a film like Moonlight. These films are winning the Oscars because they're taking the blinders off us in how we've been blind to the humanity that unites us, being much larger than the color that may separate us at first glance.
In the show notes, I'm going to let everybody know what the movies are that you mentioned, and so people can check the show notes to see those. And thanks for joining us. We appreciate that. Absolutely.
You know, I appreciate, I mean, your effort to reintegrate faith. You know, you mentioned Steve Garber as a mentor, someone who's putting vocation and calling and faith, right, into a holistic way. I want us to be able to do the same in what we watch, what we consume, that we don't see it as time away from God when we're on TV or on our screens or on our phones, but how do we bring God into that experience? If we're going to spend that many hours a day engaged with our screens, then I want that time that God is part of, not that God is apart from.